Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. I'm Young, Senior Curator from Hayward Gallery. Thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon. I know it's the second day. I think you're very excited to see the fair again. But I think in order for us to start this conversation, so just to give you a bit of context as well, the reason why we are being paired up here is the fact that we're working together. We've actually been working together on a show at Hayward that will open in October in London. Hence why we're here. But I think also it might be interesting for you to know a little bit about us in a way that I don't feel like I need to introduce Haegue too much. I think, you probably all know her. She's been really active internationally for the last 20 or so years, and as an artist. And
but they still don't know my favorite color.
We can get into that later today. But I think what's actually interesting for you to know, perhaps, is we've known each other. We just worked out quite recently that we've known each other since 2008, and the first time we met was in Hong Kong, actually. So I thought it's kind of worth bringing that up because. Can I tell them why we met, actually? So she was actually part of the Guangzhou Triennale at the time. And they had this workshop that was organized by Parasite Hong Kong, which I was sort of involved with at the time as well. And they were all coming to Hong Kong, all the international artists coming to Hong Kong and going to Guangzhou for the workshop together. But Haegue didn't get her visa. So she got stuck in Hong Kong. So I think it was like on the Saturday, I got a phone call from Tobias Berger, who was the Parasite director at that time, asking him to look after her because she was the only one left behind in Hong Kong. So we were forced to spend a weekend together. And that's how we got to know each other. And we've been, I guess I can say we've been good friends since.
Yeah, I was took care by him ever since, yes.
But what's actually quite interesting has been, I think I would like to say a privilege almost that, being able to work with Haegue together on this show because we had never worked together until now.
Except the M+.
Yeah, but there was a screening program. It was a collection-related work. So it wasn't like, sort of starting the conversation together from the beginning to sort of envisioning the whole presentation. So I think that's been a privilege and a joy, in a way, working together. But just to bring it back to Basel first, I think we start with Basel this time. Haegue is part of the encounters this year at the fair. I think many of you have seen the work already. Those works actually were they were not made at the same time at the time. They were made at different stages. And sort of this time by Haegue sort of being brought together and envisioned it as a new way of presenting them together. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I give a title to this presentation of, I would say, ensemble of sculptures, contingent spears. And I think it's a combination of two words. Both means a lot to me, like contingent, and then spears, like different words. Like I think it's important to use the plural, and it is very situatively brought together sculptures. I was interested in first. The whole ensemble brought together, starting with the duo sculptures. It's a first kind of viewing to the broader audience to present these rattan sculptures, which I called the Randing Intermediate. And this production was made for the solo show at MCAD in Manila 3 years ago. I brought the books today. I diligently tried to be a bookseller. So we just launched this book yesterday, which documents the exhibition where the rattan sculpture was born in. So it was not only premiered at the show, but the entire production was made in Manila. So for me, as a sculptor, I understand myself as a sculptor, the production and fabrication played a big role. the technique, method, as well as the research behind, and how much or what kind of attitude I take towards that craftsmanship, or sometimes I take deliberately a cynical attitude, sometimes very straightforward. Coming back to the rending intermediate, I felt very enchanted by knowing about this tradition of rattan craftsmanship, but at the same time was terrified to take a very straightforward take on the craftsmanship. I always took the craftsmanship and honored it, but at the same time twisted it. And for me, it was very straightforward take on, which is a bit new. But that's how it was born. And above the duo sculpture, you see the kind of another creature, I would say, suspended from the ceiling and stretching its tentacles, and that is born in Korea, again involved with certain types of craftsmanship and traditional craftsmanship, which is namely straw weaving, and that is compared to the rattan sculpture, the cynical approach that in one hand, I was really obtaining the skill by learning it from artisan, practicing it together with my team. But in the end, I twisted it by employing the plastic. It's 100% synthetic fake straw. And however, there is, let's say, layers of referencing the tradition, the roots, but at the same time kind of like subvert the whole idea of the origin, the one, the genuine, etc. So if I take on project about something, it has anthropological root, I think for me it's important to dive all the way through to understand as much as I could as an amateur, but at the same time coming all the way out to create the space to abstract, subvert, and maybe drifting away from what I have learned. That process of learning thoroughly, but unlearning all the way out has been the method for me throughout my practice, which I still keeping it. And I don't know how much it mediates to the audience, but yeah.
But I think what is actually quite interesting, just to go back to what you were saying in terms of your interest, I think that is ongoing interest in terms of learning and learning different traditional craftsmanships and techniques. You mentioned here is the straw weaving and the rattan weaving, so techniques in the Philippines and also elsewhere. How do you think, how do you see that in terms of your transnational, transcultural practice? Because that's something that's very important to you as well, I think.
Wow, that's a big question. How can I answer that? It was an unexpected question. Wow, that's our teamwork. Yeah, it's a big question, but it is indeed true that it's very present in the way how I live and work, I would say. I mean, born and grown up in Seoul in 70s and 80s, I was like full of Seoul and Korea. I think it was a different time, it was a different society. I was very much of the product of the Korean society where, the reality was hard, but the aspiration was strong, that, I kind of embodied that generation of creative, engaged artists who was privileged to go abroad and study and developing the individual languages, but at the same time we were so aware that our environment is not as developed as the rest of the world, and very Western oriented. So somehow, I think I got very conscious about what am I, and of course through the event in life that I left my country to study abroad, which may mark such a discontinuity in life and thinking and development, that I became very aware. I think a lot of my way of thinking is very much shaped through that discontinuity, and it's very a lot of things are conscious decision, but at the same time, I was privileged enough to go abroad, but not privileged enough to make all the decision on my freedom. So a lot of things were given. So I had to learn how to deal with that is given and accidentally or just given. And it was not a big choice, but kind of option to go for. And I think that adaptation, the period of adaptation also gave me a lot of thought. What was the original question? No.
No, I think I was being a little bit careful in terms of framing the question as well, because I think, there's always a question. I think when, because your practices, I think especially over the last decade or so, often it's been seen or understood within this transcultural, transnational framework. But then, there's always this constant debate about the lived experience as well, which is something that you are able to subvert. Like you said, you were subverting it quite a bit, not essentially your culture or your tradition, but you're able to subvert it. That's why I'm kind of quite interested in how you see that.
So transcultural or transnational way of thinking was a kind of topic for a while that I had to understand it first, I guess. And the first attempt was through looking into the academic field. Like, it doesn't matter, like history or human science or even in physics and science, there are attempts to do our job in a transnational way, and that often also pairing funnily with the transdisciplinary way of transdisciplinary methodology, and what the real danger is just the mere collection of national thinking doesn't make transnational thinking. I think it has something to do with the integrity that is grounded in a certain locality, but then not limited by it. And I learned a great deal from other academics and scholars. I was sneaking into even conferences that I maybe understood only 10% of it, but I guess it still taught me a lot. And as the second thing, that I think I had to reorientate myself in the region, like Asia. That it started a lot with my residency at STPI in Singapore, but also what you mentioned, the workshop organized by Tobias Berger as Parasite, that I had such a privilege to meet my colleague very early on, starting from Arin Runjang, Lee Kid, and all these artists, and started to exchange early on, the artists, but as well as curators. And these rootedness, but also like learning the region again, because it was not really existing in a broader term before the mid-90s, that the contemporary art scene in Asia. So we were kind of first pioneering generation, whether we are Asian nationality or not. We actually cultivated the field as well as the network. So I'm very embedded in the development, and that is maybe how much I could be transnational so far.
Yeah, I think I just want to pick up on what you were saying, because I feel very privileged to be part of that network, sort of, as well. I think, not exactly the same, but I think, the artists and the curators to mention Aaron, Lee, Tobias, we're all part of that network. I think, it's kind of hard to imagine now Hong Kong, with Basel being sort of the hub of Asia in terms of contemporary art. But I think it wasn't like that at the time. And it was actually kind of very interesting, I think, and important, I think, for a lot of us when we were sort of just, at least for me, starting out in my career, thinking about being part, being in conversation and having that kind of friendships and relationship with the different practitioners and being able to develop together as well. Sorry, I know it's not scripted at all. I'm just kind of completely going off script. But so back to our schedule content. Like I mentioned, your practice been sort of looked at in a sort of certain kind of way, abstraction in terms of, subverting certain narratives, whether material or historical. But I think before that, especially I think with Sadong 30, which is a self-initiated project in Seoul that happened in 2006. If I remember correctly, that was something that's deeply personal, and I think you had that sort of aspect of your practice where that becomes very personal. Can you talk a little bit about that in relation to what you're doing now, which is actually quite different, almost in a way?
Yeah, we will point out when the image pops up behind us about of the Sadong 30, what we are talking about. I think when I hear the word personal in relation to the project Sadong 30, I feel a bit intertwined, like a bit hesitant. In one hand, I would immediately say yes, but the other hand, something in me also resists.
Yeah, this is Sadong 30.
Yeah, resisting the straightforward being personal, because there was also topic at the period 2006 that in one hand I wanted to come up with something personal which was taboo in my way of thinking at that time. So I wished strongly that I could speak about something personal, something even pathetic or romantic or nostalgic in front of the public. It also required courage and confidence that I didn't have at that time. But the other hand, I didn't want it to be limited by the personal fabric behind this project. Given the fact that it was more or less taking place outside of the institutional framework, it was, as you saw in the slide, it was not in the museum, it was not in the gallery. It was just an initiative of me and a curator. And only known and circulated the existence of that exhibition through 500 postcards. However, it was visited and recommended and circulated and communicated and remembered through this unknown network of people that was newly maybe described as the newly coined word at that time, netizen. I think a lot of bloggers and the people who visited recommended this exhibition on the blog, in the internet. So it was, in German, I would say Mundpropaganda, like just said from person to person. And that was quite an astonishing impact of the project that I didn't expect it at all. It was more or less done to prove to myself that I could exist as an autonomous, independent being, and my dedication to art was genuine. It was more or less very personal take on making a project on my own. But then it was very well visited and debated in Seoul, that that was really not planned or expected, but it was a lesson for me that something was brewing in the air, and I was a part of that. I guess the development, and I felt like I'm accepted and maybe even weighted by the people who I didn't know. So it was a huge growth. I felt that I was growing out of that experience, and it was a soil, the Sadong 30, and it is not surprising that many curators are referring back to the project, which is also case for us, kind of revisiting Sadong 30 after 20 years. The world is not the same. My circumstance is not the same. We are established, maybe institutionalized. There is the whole bewilderness, and it's almost gone. And how can we actually bring that idea of the bare life and the existential feeling of being in the fragile house that is really can collapse any moment,
Yeah, I think I think I told you before, to me, Sadong 30 is almost like a mythical project, because I never saw it. But I'm sort of somewhat obsessed with it. I think even before we start talking about the show at Hayward, I think I often sort of mentioned it to you. Like I was very curious about that project and wanted to know more about it. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, I think I can share that we are trying to attempt to rethink how to present. I wouldn't say documentation, more like elements of that to represent that project in Hayward, which has been really interesting and quite challenging. I think it's still ongoing conversation. We're still having different ideas, but if I'm correct, it's also your first attempt to really try to readdress that project as well. I know you've done another installation in response to that, but never really sort of taking it head on in that sense, actually using certain elements that were actually presented in Sadong 30 being represented again as well. So how do you feel about that? Something that sort of, even though like a lot of people in Seoul visited it, I think a lot of people now that we are friends with actually saw it at the time, but it wasn't actually really known to most other people, internationally speaking anyway. So how do you feel about having to rethink and readdress this project for London?
I think you are right that it feels almost mythical today, speaking about Sadong 30, because there are very handful of people who really have visited, and even among the handful of people, majority of visitors were not necessarily art professionals. So it's very hard to grasp the real feeling of it and how to digest today in the field of contemporary art. However, I do think there is always a way to re-envisioning it in a contemporary way. Contemporary way meaning that we can create a new reality. If there is no singular reality, and the rest of that singular reality is not always the fake or wrong or not genuine. I think that's what I also partially fighting against, or I'm advocating a lot of those, let's say, multiple shadows. That is the leftover space of the one, the genuine, the original one. And I'm someone, or I want to be someone who is advocating and paying more attention to those reenactment of the one as the shadow, as the negative space, and as the another reality of authorities. So therefore, when you propose to include the Sadong as a kind of capsule, another capsule inside of the exhibition that I thought it's meaningful to attempt it. But I guess at that time of 2006, I guess it will be also left to the visitors and audience how to take today in 2006, 2004. Yeah, and I think our role still is important, not to make a straightforward documentation of the project, which is anyway not possible. I don't even have a single video clip. There are only a couple of photos. That's all we have. So we can't, even if we want to have a documentation or representation, it will be not possible. So it has to be kind of different types of digestion to mediate, which is an interesting role of survey show, I guess, and which is made by scholarship and institutional reading of it and just creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's never really been our intention to present documentation of the project, right? I think ever since we started talking about it, it's always been, how do we present the experience of it? I think your experience, the viewer's experience, the experience of the project, what it meant for you, but also to the visitors who actually saw that. So I think, like I said, we're still in conversation about that. So we don't quite know exactly. I mean, we sort of have some ideas, but nothing's been completely finalized yet. So I think you just need to come to London and find out later in October. But
he tries so hard to be promotional.
I know. That's my job, you know. I think the other work that the other project that we want to talk about today, which is another sort of, I would say, important milestone in terms of practice, is the storage piece, which took place before Southern 30, actually. It was in 2004.
Which was born in London, actually.
Yeah, so it's actually quite meaningful for us, again, to bring it back to London, even though now it actually belongs to a collection in Berlin. So it's actually very interesting for us to bring it back to London. But can you tell us a little bit about the stories behind it?
So the storage piece was born in the situation that I got an invitation to have a solo presentation at a gallery in London, but didn't have the means to produce work. So I simply switched the desire and fulfillment of the expression by suggesting to use the exhibition budget to bring all the works that have to be picked up from various places after the exhibition, while I didn't know where to store them. So the exhibition became a solution for lack of storage of all the works. Otherwise, I had to throw them all away. So in fact, you will also see the slide in a while, that in fact what I did was, as a sculptor, again, the space plays such a big role, and majority of the gallery space was not literally used. The storage piece occupied very little surface of the gallery. In fact, just stacked most economic way as they would be in the storage on the wooden pallet, even without unpacking the soft packaging. So they were out of the crate. At that time, we are talking about 2003 or 4, so most of my works are not even crated. So they arrived in the soft packaging or in cardboard boxes. So they were just stacked. So that's the physicality of the storage piece. And again, there was a personal crisis of not having a storage space as a young artist. but at the same time there was a public demand on artistic expression in the public. So there was this exchange of public and private, but also the desire and deficiencies, etc. It's a kind of exchange of energies somehow. And again, I think it required the courage to do it. And it became another, I guess, because it required a lot of bravery for me at that time to come up with that like non-solution. It's actually quasi-solution. It's again fake solution, but conceptually it shows the ecology of an art piece today. You know, we always only talking about when the artworks are on display, but in fact the artwork has its own circle of being stored, again packed and shipped and arrived, etc. So here we go, the two different presentation of a storage piece. And I think right before I intentionally included the so far the exhibition history of this piece, how prominent it has been exhibited and exposure to the public, and which was born out of the crisis. And the crisis in a quotation mark that it can, even the crisis have to be redefined over and over again. I think what it meant to be crisis at that time is no longer crisis for me. And I think the capability and ability always changes and depends on the place, the person, and the interaction with the public. So I guess we want to challenge this piece again within the exhibition as a display. I think there is a way to do it through the performance and unpacking, you know, the packing and unpacking ideas, but also physical. So packing and unpacking is also transformation for the artwork, right? So
Yeah, also the fact that, I think a lot of the works are very early works that I had never seen before. So it's sort of, I remember we were talking about it, and for you, you were asking why am I interested in unpacking it. I think it's a very selfish reason to a certain extent, which is me being curious about what's in it. Again, it's works that I've seen the work in person before, but never unpacked actually. So I'm sort of very conscious about, wanting to find out what's in actually the packaging. But I think sorry, I'm sort of going off script a little bit again, because what you mentioned, which is a term that you mentioned just when you were talking just now, this quasi-ness of it, the fakeness of it, which is something that's very important to you, because a lot of your works got that part, that word as a title, quasi something, something, something. Can you unpack that for us a little bit? Why is this kind of, I don't know what I should call it, the sort of this fake, make-believe kind of narrative, or whether it's actually completely fictional, but I'm sort of curious why you're interested in that.
I guess it's another strategy to challenge the idea of the original. I think the creating multiple quasi-situation and juxtapose with seemingly what constitutes the one, the genuine one, has been a subversive strategy to challenge the idea of origin. I guess throughout the culture, especially in the contemporary art, there was again a tradition of going against own tradition. I think I'm not an exception in that regard. That especially that the contemporary art was a kind of imported idea. That in Asia, the art was a part of scholarship, part of human science. It was not a separate field, and that holistic thinking is very much damaged through the import of the the art as an autonomous area, autonomous field, and I'm kind of how can I say? I'm kind of agonized by the situation that this diligent bringing up of Korzai is almost an attempt to survive in this conflictive situation for me. I think one of the best example has been my use of certain monochrome color, like Yves Klein color, that it. So normally how I choose the color blue is actually through very amateuristic, intentionally crappy survey by asking people in the gallery or institution with the color chips from local shops that provide the similar tones of Yves Klein blue, which is authorized and licensed by the artist. So there is this the iconic canon, Western canon, who even legally has a patent on certain color, that we amateuristically challenge that idea through crappy survey, which is the Yves Klein color. And as you hear in my premise, from the beginning it is programmed that there is no way to get the right color, because none of these color chips are genuine Yves Klein color. So you ended up one of the democratically chosen blue tone, and that is how we paint the wall. And that color, I named it Korzai Yves Klein blue. And there are, again, multiple Korzai Yves Klein blue realized in different museum and previous exhibitions. So.
Yeah, so I think it might be interesting then to bring it back to, because talking about this sort of institutional framework and how your work's being presented in that context, I think, throughout this conversation so far. So last year you presented a project at Kukje back in Seoul at the Hanok space, which is a traditional Korean house. I remember, yeah, you got the book again, which again just came out apparently. I haven't looked at it myself, but yeah, she loves publications. That's all I can say. I remember you told me before. I was lucky enough to have seen this, but before I saw it, I remember you telling me that it had something to do with Sadong 30 in a way. It's almost like a sequel to that. Maybe I'm going too far with that, but at least there is some kind of connection to it. I think because the fact that the buildings were both sort of Korean types of atypical Korean type of buildings, even though this is much more traditional, where Sadong 30 was sort of a more Japanese type of style, but also still very popular in Korea at the time. And also, I think in this space, we will actually get to see images of that on the screen. That there you go. You sort of started to have a slightly different kind of presentation mode, I would say as well, which I think has been kind of quite inspirational for us, in terms of the Hayward show. So can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes, so the project was titled as Latent Dwelling, and so I would say I actually started the project as a presentation, not as a real exhibition, because the primary struggle was how to use that site which is a tiny traditional house that is made for living. It was not made for exhibition display. I mean, today we know, of course, a lot of repurposed exhibition space, which used to be industrial building or other types of, if made for other types of purpose. But however, I think it was, when you go into the space, you feel the intimacy, the narrowness, and it also stands for a certain period of time. Like the life at that period of like dynasty before the modernization was very scarce in terms of resources, and so the houses are tight, and you cannot have enough distances. So at the beginning, I was a bit frustrated because most of my works are too big for that little house. Like physically, it's such a mismatch. But I think later, to make it short, later that mismatch was exactly what I had to embrace and offered me a solution. I really make this space very full. And so normally, you know, the way how we relate ourselves physically in the exhibition is, you know, like you have enough space to walk freely, and the works are displayed in a right distance and between the space, between the pieces, and there is a kind of very conventional amount of free space within the exhibition. But in this time, like when you are in the exhibition, you are so surrounded by the artworks that if you are the minor, obviously you are the minor being. It's like their world, and you just have a peek into their habitus, let's say. So it's an extreme layered, high density space that institutionally would not actually work. And it also reminded me of, you know, my early period that I, without knowing, I used to create a lot of layers. Often I got a critique that, oh, Haegue, you display too many different work in such a high density. It's not a good display. You don't know how to display works, you know. But I was stubborn enough to stick to it, you know. I wanted to make a layer instead of making a comfortable, convenient display. And it's about the tension between me and the space, that, you know, when to make a pause and punctuation, and when to make a, you know, staccatos and one after the other. And later dwelling really feels like a cocoons, that the works are like really taking up the space and maybe fermenting, and we can have a peek into it. So in order to reinforce that idea of, you know, the space is so taken by the works, we even extended the opening hours. So there are unusual experience of the nocturnal visit, and because I didn't use any single artificial light for the show, that the both in the daytime and the nighttime, you know, what can be seen is seen, and there are dark corners and bright space nearby the window. So, but for the safety, as well as for the like interesting viewing, so we offered two light sources for the nocturnal viewing. One is the electric candles. So it is electric, so again, fake candle, but even it's a warm candlelight kind of quality, color temperature of light, but even flickers, you know. So it really gives a feeling of this very dynamic light of candle that catches all the small movement of the air, you know. That's the miraculous thing about candle, that it's unlikely to the electric light. It really breathes, right? And the other thing is handheld flashlight. So when you come to the gallery in the evening, you are equipped with a flashlight, meaning you only can see partial thing, and you cannot see everything at once. And that is another types of viewing. And I heard that especially there were multiple rainy days. That was very interesting to be in that house with the flashlight, but the lot of wind and the rain sound. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's why I think, because you know I've seen quite a few of your institutional solo exhibitions. You know, I think the way the works were presented, you might not like what I'm gonna say, but like, you know, they have certain kind of so much more contemporary art, so minimal kind of way of being presented, you know, the works. Whereas I think for us, I think it's sort of, this show has been kind of inspirational in the sense that, you know, we are actually changing that format a little bit in certain part of it anyway. So I think I've said enough about the our show at Hayward as well.
Too many spoilers. Already.
Yeah, I know. No, but we got a lot more. It's a survey, so we got a lot more. So I think we still need to keep a little bit of mystery to that. So it might be good actually. Now is the moment to open up to the audience to see if they got any questions. And before that, I would like to also say thank you to Stephanie, the curator of the conversation program, for inviting us as well. I think they got mic, so if you got any questions, please raise your hands and they would. Oh, there's one.
Thank you. You mentioned about your work is full of contradictions in your life. So you mentioned about the transnational and become integrity. I just wondered that about those contradictions of your life, how it helps you to become transnational and become integrity. Thank you.
I mean, it's always hard to objectify oneself. That I can only assume by the reaction of the people that I'm maybe consistently incoherent. You know, maybe that's. I mean, I can only really speculate what is in me, why I'm driven to be in that way. So it's a lot of self-speculation about myself as well. Like, I cannot fully objectify myself. Therefore, I think I need curators and historian and critique who has a distance and maybe both historical distance and social distance and existential distance to give an interpretation of certain works and actions of me. However, I speculate that I don't know if it is a contradiction, but there are many of me in me. You know, I often ironically use the word, the pronoun we instead of I, because I really do feel that there are different desires and they obviously coexist. But whether they are contradicting, I'm not so sure even. And I try to be very open about those multiple eyes in me.
Yeah, I can attest to the fact that I think there are many Haegues in Haegue. So, any other questions? Oh, there's one over there, I think.
Well, just now you mentioned about the presentation. The artwork is more like your presentation instead of exhibition. So I wonder, like, what would you distinguish these two definitions in gallery where the art presented? Thank you.
I think in one hand, there is a creation of works in the studio, right, or on site. So the production, creation, fabrication, etc. But the series of production or works doesn't necessarily constitute automatically on an exhibition, because it's in such a complex effort to go on the realm of publicness, you know. I meant presentation because of the ambition to be on public is relatively small compared to, let's say, at Hayward. I have to fully acknowledge that we are fully on the public, facing the big public, but because it was small, physically small, but also part of the gallery, and I didn't really produce any work specifically for the show, so the whole ambition, how we approach the public, was relatively small. So it's from my point of view, it's an expression of modesty, or maybe, expression of modesty according to the size of the public responsibility, I guess. I don't know if it makes sense.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, if there are any other question. Yep.
You were talking about the Klein Blue and how you had a very primitive method of selecting an alternative to it. What's your opinion on, I guess, copyright on such a foundational aspect of creating art?
I'm not against copyright. I'm not total copy leftist neither. I guess, I think if I have a historical relevance, whether it is artist or non-art related reference, I think first thing I do is kind of I call it tracing. It's like a studying and maybe contemplating, and often the case even honoring what I have studied. But then I have to come up eventually with something else. It's not only have to, but that I end up to come up with something else in the end. But it's not on opposing something or going against something. For me, it's just very important to go for something than being a reactionary to go against something. It's so much, for me, it's much more about including. Therefore, I'm using this strange word, tracing. It's not imitating, but it's not only owing, honoring. It's a strange act of tracing, but while I'm tracing, I might divert. Maybe it's a bit similar to what Derrida said, the différence, you know. There is a minimalistic act of circling, and that often also take a very intensive form, that it get maybe even violent, you know. It's not always peaceful the way how I circle around a certain notion or figure, that it get aggressive, it get frustrated, and it even while I'm circling, it's so intense that I might tear the paper, you know. But it is circling. It's not negating something. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, on that note, I think we are done. So thank you so much for coming. And yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Jung, and thank you, Ralph, to be with us.
Oh yeah, our director is there, Ralph Rugov, so.